Joining us is a man who is no stranger to the Observer. I want to say a special good evening to Oropouche West MP and UNC Shadow Minister of Finance, Mr. Dave Tancoo. Pleasant good evening, sir.
Pleasant good evening to you, Mikey, and a wonderful evening to your listeners as well that have tuned on to hear us deal with a very critical issue facing Trinidad and Tobago right now.
Thank you so much for taking time out. Let's get into the meat of things happening today. Of course, you've already spoken out on the fact that firing the TSTT CEO is not enough. You said it's a small step, and you're calling on Minister Gonzalez, who's the Minister of Public Utilities, to deliver on his promise to make the report publicly available. What are we looking at here? I mean, is this just cosmetic, or are we ever going to get to the core root of this problem?
Well, Mikey, since this issue was first raised by the media, not by TSTT, the issue was first raised by the media. When the breach happened on October 9th, we didn't learn about it in Trinidad and Tobago until the end of October, weeks afterwards, when private media individuals released the issue, so that Trinidadians only became aware that their documents, their private and confidential information had actually been leaked on the dark web and was available to criminals internationally. That then followed, but that was then followed by a spate of actions that were very, very curious. TSTT insisted that nothing was lost. The Minister of Public Utilities, Marvin Gonzalez, in Parliament insisted that while there was an attempt, no breach took place. Again, it fell to the private media. It fell to the media to find information which showed that, in fact, 6 gigabytes of data, 1.1 million data points, which actually was actually extracted from TSTT and put on the dark web. TSTT then came out again and said, well, there's no banking information, it was all data. Subsequent to that, another media house provided information that showed that people's banking information was actually released. It was only at that time that we realized that this government and TSTT were playing games continuously instead of coming clean with the population and telling the country what exactly this was. The Prime Minister himself, after the Minister and TSTT said it was nothing serious, the Prime Minister eventually came out and said it was a national security threat. And even then, from then to now, a week has passed, and nothing more has been said. It is my concern, it is my fear, that the removal of Lisa Agard is a simple cosmetic attempt to have a fall guy. Now, it is my view that she should have been fired from day one.
Right. From
leading the country, she should have been fired from day one. But she did not act alone. There's a board of directors which would have approved her output. There was a board of directors which would have approved her statements. That board of directors also needs to go.
And you're right about that. I mean, when you look at it...
Talk to the minister as well. The minister carried on with this thing. The minister promised an open investigation, and that information will be brought to the public domain as long as it does not compromise the operations of TSTT. Up to today, we have no idea of what that report did. Now, I remember raising this issue. There was a concern I had because the minister jumped up and said, you know what, we should do an independent investigation. That independent investigation, commissioned by the minister who lied to the population, was requested of TSTT, the management and the CEO of whom had lied to the country. So the minister who lied to the country was asking another entity that lied to the country to investigate itself about its conduct and report back to the minister who lied to the country.
Yeah, Mr. Tancoo, you've raised some very valid points there. And I mean, definitely we were left in the dark, no pun intended, by all of this that has taken place. You have a minister who said that he was not fully informed, which led him to saying customers' data was not compromised in Parliament on November 1st. Subsequently, some further information came to the forefront, and as a result of that, he then said that he decided to conduct an independent, thorough investigation into the matter and in the public's interest to let the people of Trinidad and Tobago understand what in fact took place. how it was managed when it was first detected, and what ought to be done to prevent this from happening again. Now, basically, looking on, one can clearly see this was poor corporate governance. Poor corporate governance. Let's put it where it needs to be put, and let people understand. Because so many people were out there saying, listen, people are getting messages from my WhatsApp telling them that I need money and so forth. People complained about that. And when they go to TSTT, they say, listen, you have to change the account. Why should we be inconvenienced for the mistake of an entire board if, in fact, they haven't given us clarity on the effect and how far-reaching this problem is going to be? And to put things in right perspective, how does a cyber attack affect a country or an economy? Now, earlier this year, it affected more than 200,000 computers across more than 100 countries and cost an estimate $8 billion in just 4 days. And this is according to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. The economic impact of cybercrime is most severe in Europe, and it's approaching 0.84% of regional GDP. That's to tell you. And who is most affected by cyber attacks? And we're hearing it now. We're hearing PriceSmart, we're hearing, of course, courts, and there are 5 industries that are very vulnerable. Public administration, healthcare and pharmaceuticals, finance and insurance, education and research, and retail. So this is just something that we can just simply, slide under the rug and say, hey, it happened, oops, and let's go on as business as normal. Basically, we are sitting ducks when it comes to the fact that we are not protected when it comes to our data, our banking records, and everything that we hold close that deals with our business.
I fully agree with you. There's a financial risk here. But I wanted to narrow this down. There were international instances of cyber attack which cost several hundreds of millions of dollars. In this particular instance, we have not yet quantified if there's a cost and how much the cost is. Because not a single person except for the Prime Minister, the Minister of Public Utilities, was very anxious to declare that the Prime Minister's data was, first they said the Prime Minister's data was affected, then they said the Prime Minister's data was not affected, and right next to that article, there was another article where the Prime Minister said that he was worried about his ATM business because he was also compromised. So, up to date, outside of the Prime Minister himself being advised that his information may be on the net, it may be on the dark web, it may be compromised, nobody else has been told by TSTT whether their data has been affected and what the repercussions could be, what has been done. The first requirement for when you get cyber attack is to advise the persons who are placed at risk that their data and their information is at risk. TSTT to date has not done that. So this is not just about Lisa Agard lying to the population or misinformation or providing misinformation to the minister and the minister lying to the population or however it went. This is not just about the way it was communicated. Up to today, the persons who are affected, the victims of this cyber breach was not just TSTT, it was the subscribers to TSTT, and we don't know what that information is being used for. Like I said, there was a Guardian article that specified that up to credit card data, credit card information had been accessed in that 6.6 gigabytes that was hacked. So that is one aspect of how it can put I think it was 1.2 million points, gigabytes were hacked. But the other part of that is if you're an investor looking into Trinidad and Tobago, and you see the largest IT provider, the provider of telephone services and telecommunication services to Trinidad and Tobago, the largest one, has been hacked and they behave like this. What would be your level of confidence coming into Trinidad and Tobago? Not just to set up shop, but also to engage in transactions. The government spent the last 3 weeks boasting about they're going to go to cashless. Yeah. They're going to go cashless. But how are you going to go cashless? How are we going to move forward with technology when the basic requirement for TSTT to report back to its citizens, the shareholders, and we are all shareholders. We pay Lisa Agard her salary. We pay the minister his salary. The basic requirement is to report the incidents of crime to the victim so that the victim could start preparing himself and changing what has to be changed, etc. TSTT to date has not done that.
Yeah, but when you have a minister saying that in the public interest, to let us, the citizens, understand what in fact took place, how it was managed, when it was first detected, and what ought to be done to prevent this from happening again. All right, so it's happening all over the world. Okay, all right, we understand that. But the fact of the matter is that when you talk about how it took place, were there any measures in place to prevent this, first of all? I mean, what kind of team did you have? How much of an expert of a team did you have dealing with this? And when it did happen, what was your first response? What is your response team or your response mechanism when you detect that, hey, you've been hacked? And then, of course, what ought to be done to prevent it from happening again? Now, if it is that this is not going to be made public to us, then basically you're just saying, well, hey, it happens and we move on. But that cannot be. And I think you just said it. If the largest internet provider in this country is so easily hacked, so easily compromised, then really and truly, what are we looking at moving forward?
Mikey, I want to say this. Hacking is almost now a matter of fact for life. It is almost like a matter of fact for life, because no matter whatever systems you have, even in your basic laptop, there are attempts to hack it on a regular basis.
Agreed.
So we expect that there will be attempts to hack into international providers, into servers of all sorts, all over the world. It happens. What is supposed to happen, though, is that when an incident such as this happens, the very institution which has your information, which has your credit card information, which has your personal data, how much your banking data, how much money you have in the bank, etc., etc. All of that is online, you know.
Yes.
And those very institutions owe to the consumer who are paying them for their service a duty of care to protect their data. When that breach takes place, because more often than not we will have attempts to breach, but when a breach takes place, what is critical then is the response from the relevant institution. And what we saw was the worst example of a bad example of how to respond to a data crisis, to how to respond to a cyber attack, which is happening around the world. We should have learned how the rest of the world treats with this. In other parts of the world, there's a legal requirement within 72 hours of your information being compromised that you must be made aware. I had an instance before where my credit card was hacked. And within hours, I was advised that my credit card had been compromised by the institution itself. Within 72 hours, in fact, it was within hours. To date, I don't know, Mikey, I'm sure you don't know, and in fact, all of your listeners do not know if their personal information, if their ID cards, their email addresses, their bank information, how much money they have, their bank account numbers, their credit card numbers. Up to today, none of your listeners are aware if their information has been compromised. And that is not just Lisa Agard, that's the entire board of directors and the Minister of Public Utilities who has failed comprehensively. What is frightening too is because of this absence of information, it's almost as if they believe that if they say nothing, we will forget. But because of this absence of information, citizens are living in absolute fear. So we no longer just fear the criminals outside. We are now afraid of the white-collar criminals.
Yeah, and I agree with you. Looking at some of the other issues here, recently the finance minister defended this government's debt management framework, stating that his ministry recently saved Trinidad and Tobago from losing its reputation as having never defaulted on public debt.
That is a jokey, very jokey statement. And a large response to that. And it is true, but it is how to lie with statistics. This is Minister Imbert teaching us how to lie with statistics. We've never defaulted on public debt because we keep borrowing. So that the public debt has continued to grow because this minister is borrowing money to finance paying back of debt. So, for example, the minister announced, I think in this last budget year, that we were looking at a budget deficit which he had to finance of about $5 billion. When you looked at the yellow books, do you know how much money they intended to borrow? Not $5 billion, not 5 billion. So the deficit, as I tried to explain previously, the deficit is the amount of revenue that you get in the country less the amount of expenditure. So if you are spending more than you are earning, you are going to be in a deficit. Based on the Minister of Finance's 2023 to 2024 budget, he estimated that they were going to spend $5 billion odd more than they were earning, and therefore you had to borrow to finance that. When we checked in the document,
right,
the minister was not going to borrow $5 billion. He was going to borrow $13 billion. Not 5, $13 billion. Those are the estimates of revenue. Those are in page Roman 5 of the estimates of revenue. And what that tells us is the minister is going to borrow to pay off existing debt. So think about it from a household point of view. You borrow money from the bank, you borrow $5. And then you're going to have to borrow $6 because you have to borrow now with interest to pay off that $5. So you're borrowing money to pay debt, but you're incurring more debt because you now have to add additional interest to pay off existing debt. So while the minister gloats and boasts that he's not ever had to renege on public debt and violate the relevant agreements, that is only because they've been drawing down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and they've been borrowing money to pay off debt, which cannot be sustainable. That is a debt trap because you keep borrowing more and more money to pay off more and more debt. Instead, what is supposed to happen when you borrow money as a government is you're supposed to borrow money to invest in something that will pay back enough so that you can service your debt. When you borrow money from the bank to buy a car, you have to pay back. You have to find a way to generate enough money, maybe using the car or from doing some kind of other activity, to pay back the bank. Otherwise, you're in a debt crisis. This government is borrowing money to fund debt. None of that money is being used to create new industries, new revenue streams, to generate anything that will pay back the debt.
But the minister seems rather confident in stating that the public debt management is a highly specialized area and that the Ministry of Finance has over decades invested in significant training of its staff. He said they were experts, and he questioned why state enterprises should be given the responsibility to do debt and financing management, calling it bureaucracy, and when they do not have the expertise or resources, including the necessary funding.
Mikey, the fact is that the law provides for various state enterprises to borrow money. Those laws exist. So TSTT borrow money, TSTT could borrow money, and they could borrow money based on government guarantees as well. Okay. The Ministry of Finance does have substantial amount of persons who are highly trained and highly skilled. But there are policy decisions. Borrowing is a policy decision, And where that money is being spent is also a policy decision, and it is the government, it is the PNM in this instance, that makes the policy. So you may have the highest skilled technical staff. When the minister says we need to borrow money to do this, that, and the other, all that technical staff is able to do is to say how to do it. We had an episode just recently when the minister, a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Education advised the minister that because of the existing amount of money that they have in the system, the payment of the back pay that the government had agreed to provide could not have been done in a time frame, and that was based on the amount of money presently before the ministry. So the permanent secretary, acting based on information in front of him, said we couldn't do this until next year. The Prime Minister went public and insulted and abused that individual, and that permanent secretary has now been transferred. Because they dared to question the minister, because they dared to provide guidance. That gentleman in particular, I think he's a gentleman. I don't know.
It is a gentleman, and that's that he was transferred, of course, and proceeded on vacation leave, and his reassignment would be known when he resumes office from leave. And many people are saying,
told that he's going to be put in the Minister of Communications without a portfolio. They're just going to put him there to sit down and mind a desk, and that is because he dared to speak up and to raise an issue. What the Prime Minister says is that no permanent secretary could tell the politician that this could or could not be done. The policy decision will be taken by the Prime Minister and the Ministry and the Cabinet, and the Minister and the Cabinet will instruct, and it is the job of the permanent secretary and the public service, according to the Prime Minister, to find a way to get it done. So the point being that this, just to come back to the Ministry of Finance, while the minister is saying we have all these technical people and they're technically competent, etc., 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 their job is simply to implement the decisions of the cabinet and the prime minister and the ministers. And those decisions that the ministry and the government has been doing is to continue to borrow, to pay debt, continue to borrow for the glory projects that they have been advertising without being able to succeed and to finish, and ignore procurement legislation because they've taken away substantial state borrowing from under the purview of the procurement legislation.
But let me ask you this, Mr. Tancoo. I mean, you hear these comments being made by the finance minister. Things are on stream. Things are very much balanced. The economy is performing better than predicted, and by whom, that's never clear to us. But we hear all of this rhetoric being thrown around. And at the end of it all, that reality is not what we as citizens are living on a daily basis. The middle class has been wiped out. We've had economist Dr. Indira Sajawan. She was on, and she made it quite clear that a family that may have had a household that had 2 vehicles would have to sell one and perhaps even rent the other to bring in some sort of income to supplement what they're bringing in. And all of these stories, which is the reality that many people are facing right now, but yet still it's a different narrative, a different story being told by government. Why is that?
Because the government's intention is to mislead. Their whole objective is to misinform and mislead. Mikee, the inflation rate, the rate at which prices have been increasing is substantial. The minister comes and tells you, we're celebrating, we're giving you 4%, yay! And by the end of the year, you'll get it for Christmas, 4%. When you check over the period, the cost of goods and services, the cost of living has gone up by over 20%. So when they come and they give you those 4%, you are still in a negative. Your dollar could buy less today than it could have bought before. But that's not all. He came and told you he's giving you 4%, and he shook your hand and everybody celebrated. And 2 or 3 days afterwards, then you heard about the RIC increase, which is substantial. Water rate, electricity rates are going to go up by a substantial amount. Property tax is coming. That 4% now is minus. So the minister is creating a narrative that he repeats all the time and telling you that things are going well and things. That minister is living in la la land at taxpayers' expense because I am a member of parliament. I live in the real world. So do you, Mikee. Although you're not a member of parliament, you're a member of the community that is also aware that because you're on the ground and you would have been getting calls of people telling you that things are really bad outside. When the government is saying, when the Minister of Finance is boasting that the unemployment rate is 4%, I don't know where he's getting that figure from. Every single day I have people coming into my constituency office begging for jobs. People who are highly qualified, school children who are leaving school with degrees, with trade certificates, etc., cannot get jobs in this country. And the minister is boasting about a 3% or a 4% unemployment rate. That is absolute hogwash. When the minister says that the economy is going well and doing well, he should walk around and see the amount of businesses, small and medium-sized businesses that have closed down. And when these SMEs close down, and the facts are there in the National Insurance Board report, it shows that thousands of persons have fallen off. They are no longer contributing to the NIB. That's why the NIB is in crisis, because there's that fallout of the number of persons contributing to NIB. That means that there are less and less people employed. We are in a bad situation. I mean, I really hope that citizens understand what has brought them to this place.
Well, I think we've seen some signs of desperation. I mean, the fact that we've gone back to the special works due way of back pay, ensuring that in every oven there's going to be a chicken or a ham. But when the dust settles, when the jingle bells and the Santa Claus has left, the reality is that there's going to be an increase in so many things. We're talking about food, we're talking about a hike in electricity rates, we're also talking about property tax. So basically you're giving it one hand and taking back every single thing and demanding more on top of that come 2024. And so when you hear these things, I mean, how does the opposition feel? And as you said, people will come into your office on a daily basis and let you know, listen, I had a life. I had a plan. I had goals. SMEs, where Paula Gopi-Schoon, the minister, made it clear, is the economic backbone of every economy. Not my words, her words. But yet still, throughout the entire pandemic, there was no lifeline, no economic lifeline, no economic cushion that was given. Walk through Trin City Mall, walk through any of these plazas, and the only thing that seems to be for rent there is space. I mean, so what are we looking at based on all that you have said and what the government faces to realize?
I think what we have seen now is the worst government ever. They're running this country by PR. I believe, too, that what the government has started doing, not now, but for quite a while, is attacking anybody who dares to go against them. They attack viciously ministers and the Prime Minister. Personally attacks individuals if their views, especially if they have an informed view, is in opposition to what the government is saying. And what the government is wanting to create the impression of, they are gaslighting citizens into believing that things are well, there's a plan coming. Dragon gas will come and solve everybody's problem, so that is why they're not developing the economy. That's why they're not diversifying. There is a plan. The fact is that not all is bad. All is bad if we keep the government. After 8 years, we have seen ourselves go backward decades. Our country has regressed decades. If we continue along this route, we will see our country getting worse. The crime situation is not just because criminals want to make money. There's a level of frustration, there's a social decay that has started to occur, largely because of the attitude of the Prime Minister, the aggressive, abusive nature of the Prime Minister, and the example that he and his colleagues are setting to citizens outside there. It is horrendous. We've seen fights in schools, we've seen violence in schools to the extent that we've never seen before. We've seen higher and higher murder rates. There's a level of explosion in the base of the population that is coming from a level of frustration. And if that continues, it is average citizens that are going to continue to suffer. We have been made to bear the brunt. The middle income, have been made to bear the brunt of government misconduct, to the benefit of only a select few people who are declaring, I saw a few of them in today's newspaper, declaring billions of dollars in profit.
Oh, yeah.
While small and medium-sized businesses suffer. Mega businesses that are conducting the same kind of business as the small and medium-sized businesses have unlimited access to foreign exchange so that they can transact. But small and medium-sized business, they must suffer.
Yeah. So I want to thank you so much for taking time out to link with us this evening. It definitely has been a pleasure. And we will be checking in with you periodically. Best of luck to you and your entire team. And hopefully we'll touch base before we usher in a brand new year. Be safe.
Thank you very much. Mikee, I want to beg citizens to pay attention to what has happened with this TSTT because there's much, much more to come.
I agree with
Thank you very much.
I agree with you. Thank you so much.